us have someone come forward who wants to read.
Don't all jump at once.
Oh, no.
Bless you. Read the first story.
The next day, the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him. So the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify. It was also because they heard that he had performed this sign that the crowd went to meet him. The Pharisees then said to one another, "You see, you can do nothing. Look, the world has gone after him."
And the second voice. Kelly?
And then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you and let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him."
So how is it that we manage such a journey in 7 chapters? From Jesus coming in, hailed by the crowds who had seen him raise Lazarus up, and now the crowd is willing to say, "Crucify him, crucify him." Is it a different crowd? We're going to puzzle our way through this. Maybe the crowd that greeted him coming in was different than the crowd that would care about him when he was arrested, beaten. But, if you were one of the ones who greeted him coming in, would you not have been there after you heard he'd been arrested by the priest? I think it's reasonable to think both crowds were the same. So the hearts of the crowd had turned against him. Now, was this a gradual thing over the course of the week? Did he come in and they were delighted and he said some stuff that was kind of weird, because Jesus would say things like, "Unless you eat my body and drink my blood," that would throw people off. It did. That was in John 6. Did his popularity erode gradually over the week? It doesn't seem so. It seems like every day he taught in the temple, completely unharmed, unscathed, not even chastised by the chief priests who ran the place. He was very popular Thursday night, and Friday afternoon he was dead. At the behest of the same crowd that greeted him and who loved him Thursday at sundown. Now, how do you get from there to there? I know that some of the nice anti-Semitic stuff that people like to reel off is, "Oh, well, it's the Jews, they're fickle." I'll turn on you in a minute. Well, they did turn, but I don't think that that's a pejorative that really works. But I think I figured it out. Because, you know, we're not the only ones who have Bible stories, right? We have the Bible stories our Savior taught us. Prodigal son, the owner and the tenants. We have other stories, water made into wine. We have our Bible stories. Well, we have Old Testament stories too. We've used David and Bathsheba ourselves here. Who slew 1,500 Philistines with a jawbone of an ass? Come on. You know this one.
Samson.
Samson, there you go.
Right.
Thank you, Joanne. Yeah. I know that's a poor pedagogical technique to stand up and make the kids guess, but I'm pretty sure I don't have kids in this room, so. We have our Old Testament stories that we know pretty good too. But there's one that I don't know that we tell a lot, and yet they would have known very well. And that's the story of the prophet Elisha. Elisha's the second guy. There was Elijah with a J, and then there's Elisha with an SH. And Elisha got to have a double measure of Elijah's spirit. And, well, one of the things that, if you want to read about this, by the way, you go home, it's 2 Kings chapter 6 in the next couple chapters. So I'll boil it down for you. 2 Kings chapter 6. There's this problem for a king of Aram. Aram is a little country a little up and to the right of Israel. He kept wanting to invade and take some of these Israelite cities. And you know, if you really wanted to do that, it wasn't that hard to do because they didn't have standing armies back then. You know, so if you could sneak your army together and go jump some poor unsuspecting city, you'd probably have success. The problem was as long as Elisha was the prophet in the land, there was no such thing as an unsuspecting city. Because Elisha would know that the king of Aram had yet again assembled his troops. He'd tell the king, get ready, it'll be here. And the army of the Arameans would come tooling in, and they'd go smack into the assembled army of Israel. And they'd go home, and the king of Aram said, I just don't get this guy. And he literally says, I think this guy's got somebody in my bathroom because he knows my every thought before I even know it myself. So finally, he says, I'm going after the wrong target here. I need to take out this prophet, and then I can take out the cities at my leisure. So he gets a hold of Elisha's itinerary somehow, and Elisha, he travels on a donkey with one manservant. And they go and they stay at the local place to stay overnight. And the manservant, well, he had a little too much to drink last night, so he's up a little earlier than his prophet master, and he goes out to the outhouse. It's fun, these Old Testament stories are pretty real. So he's on his way to the outhouse, and he looks around and he realizes that the entire valley they're in is full of the army of the king of Aram. And he goes, oh boy, we're cooked now. And he runs back in the house, and he says, Master, we're doomed. And Elisha says, calm. Not to worry, those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And the servant kind of does a double take, and he looks out the window again, and sure enough, the king of Aram's army has filled the valley, and completely surrounding it on the entire perimeter of the valley is an army of the angels of the Lord, all in bright array. And Elisha walks out to the front porch, and he says, "Oh Lord, strike them blind," and they all go blind. And he leads them, literally on foot, on a long string. Leads them all the way back to Aram, gets them back to the border, and he says, "Oh Lord, give them their sight back," and they can all see. And needless to say, they had no more problems from the king of Aram for the rest of that king's life. This is how a man of God deals with the bad guys. Everybody knew the story. It's simply how a prophet does business. And the mob comes up the hill, sneaks up on Jesus, and we know that Jesus knows he was coming, but unlike Elisha and the armies of Israel, nobody's prepared. Jesus knows what's coming, and he doesn't run. Okay, doesn't run. That's good. That's like a prophet. But the prophets are all snoozing under a tree instead of ready to. And that's just wrong. That's just wrong. You know what to expect from a man of God. The man of God expects the unexpected. And they didn't expect. And then they come up and they grab him. Now, he doesn't say, "Oh Lord, strike them blind," lead them back down the hill to the temple, drop them off and say, "Oh Lord, give them their sight back," and go back up into the garden and finish praying. He's captured. He's captured. He's captured. That's unthinkable. You don't capture men of God. We know the stories. That's not one of them. Huh. You know, I'll take the sexism out of it. Hell hath no fury like a lover scorned. If these people who were deeply, deeply in love with Jesus thought that the Messiah had come, spent all day, every day in the temple listening to him as best they could, coming even earlier the next day to get a little closer before they had to sit down. And they hear that the chief priests snuck up on him and got him. And they weren't all struck dead or blind. And then it's like, he fooled me. He isn't who I thought he was, and he let me think he was. Well, why did Jesus let them believe he was the Messiah? Because he was. But unlike the prophet Elisha, his job was to get captured, rather than his job was to defend Israel. So Jesus had a different job description, but it was mistaken by the crowd for a different person. A liar. A deceiver. And they wanted him. And it was the same crowd that loved him Thursday that cried out, "Crucify him," on Friday. And it wasn't because they were fickle. It was because they loved that much. So their sense of betrayal was that great. And then all of a sudden it makes sense to me. A simple calculation on the part of some people. The net sum of that calculation is, we understand God. We know how God does business. What we are observing isn't that. Kill him. Crucify him. And aren't we glad? I certainly am. I don't know that I wouldn't have fallen for it too. I don't know that I would have not been in that crowd shouting out, because I don't care much for people who claim something in the name of God and then trip up. This guy last year who was saying that the end of the world was whatever night, and he talked his believers into doing totally insane, dumb things with their worldly wealth. And then the next morning it didn't happen, and he goes, well, I guess I'll just have to recalculate. It's like, recalculate, I'm going to wring your neck. So I don't know that I wouldn't have been in that mob. But because I've had the benefit of a few thousand years, I can look on and I can say, you know what? When I think I understand God, I better be careful. I better be humble. I better not think just twice, but maybe 4 or 6 times. Because when it looked for all the world like Jesus was out of control, like he was a liar and a deceiver, and the only way to make things right was to kill somebody, the truth of the matter was God was never quite so much in control as when the crowds, his own people, knew him not, called for his death. And that death rebounded for the good of them, the very ones who cried out, and us, who might very well have made the same mistake. It's good counsel to us that we need to understand when love feels betrayed. And we need to understand that we don't always have the radar on the will of God. Spirit is a tricky thing. One of the things that Jesus teaches to Nicodemus, he says, you know the wind, you feel it, you hear the sound of it, but you don't know where it comes from or where it goes to. Well, that was said in Greek. And the wind in Greek is pneumos. And the pneumos, that is, the wind is also the pneumos that is our breath. The breath of God, the Spirit of God. You know the Spirit. You hear the Spirit tell you things. You feel the Spirit. But you don't know where it's coming or where it's going. Let us be humble in the face of Jesus' fate, realizing that even when it looked like God was completely on the skids, God was utterly in control.